In this lesson, you will learn how to solve equations and inequalities with fractions. So the first thing I'd like to do is to rewrite this equation, 3/7 y plus 4 equals 1. Instead of writing it as 3/7 y, I will write this as 3y over 7. And then I will change 4 to 4 over 1 equals 1 over 1. And when you have an equation or an inequality with fractions, the best thing to do is to find a least common denominator. So with denominators of 7 and 1, I'm going to list multiples of 7, and I don't have to go very far here. I'm just going to list the first three, 7, 14, and 21. And then when I list the multiples of 1, the smallest number that the two lists have in common is 7. So if your least common denominator is 7, then you want to multiply all of the fractions denominators by what you need to get a 7. It's just like adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators. So if I rewrite this equation as 3y over 7 plus 28 over 7 equals 7 over 7, the denominators cancel so that I have 3y plus 28 equals 7. And I just go ahead and solve for y. So 3y equals negative 21, and then I divide both sides by 3 so that my final answer is y equals negative 7. For number 2, 9 minus 3/4 t equals 12. So I start by writing this as 9 over 1 minus 3t over 4 instead of 3/4 t, just move the variable up to the numerator, equals 12 over 1. So if I take my denominators of 4 and 1 and I list the first few multiples of 4, remember, this is just like adding and subtracting fractions when you're finding the common denominator for equations, and the least common denominator is 4. So you want all of the denominators to be 4 so that you can cancel them. So 36 over 4 minus 3t over 4 is equal to 48 over 4. The 4's cancel, and we have 36 minus 3t equals 48. And we just go ahead and solve for t. And t is equal to negative 4. For number 3, negative 5/3 a, we want to rewrite as negative 5a over 3, and then plus 3 is plus 3 over 1, equals 23 over 1. So I find my common denominator, I list the first few multiples of 3, and then of 1, and the smallest number that they have in common is 3, so my least common denominator is 3. So once you determine your least common denominator, you want all of your denominators to be 3. So I multiply the numerator and denominator by 3, and now the equation is negative 5a over 3 plus 9 over 3 equals 69 over 3. And since all of the denominators are 3 in this equation, we can cancel out all of the 3's so that we have negative 5a plus 9 equals 69. And then I just go ahead and solve for a, starting with subtraction. You want to move the 9 over to the right side of the equation. And so we have negative 5a equals 60. And then divide both sides by negative 5. And 60 divided by negative 5 is negative 12. So a is equal to negative 12. So for number 4, we already have the x written correctly. Instead of 1/2 x, this is already written as x over 2. And negative 4 and 1/3, we want to change that to an improper fraction. So I take the 4, multiply it by the 3, and get 12. Add the 1 on top, so it's negative 13 over 3. And then 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9, so it's equal to negative 9 over 4. To find the least common denominator, I start by listing the first few multiples of 2, and same for 3. And for 4, I just take all of my denominators. And if I look at my list, I don't have any number in common, but if I add just one more number to 2's list, the least common denominator is 12. So with the least common denominator of 12, you want to multiply the first fraction by 6, because 2 times 6 is 12, and then the second fraction times 4, and then the third fraction times 3. So you have 6x over 12 minus 13 times 4 is 52 over 12 equals negative 27 over 12. And with all the denominators equal to 12, they cancel. And I can rewrite this as 6x minus 52 equals negative 27. And I continue by adding the 52 to both sides, so that I get 6x equals negative 27 plus 52. I want to subtract the two numbers and take the sign of the larger. 52 minus 27 is 25. And then if I divide both sides by 6, I get x is equal to 25 over 6. 25 over 6 cannot be reduced, but I'm going to change this number into a mixed number by dividing 6 into 25. 6 goes into 25 4 times with the remainder of 1. So x is equal to 25 over 6, or 4 1/6. For number 5, 1.5 plus x over negative 2 equals 3.5. So in this problem, starting with 1.5, I take 1 times 2, add the numerator, and I get 3 over 2. And on this second term, x over negative 2, I'm going to take this negative sign and just replace it with the positive number that's in front. So that instead of having plus x over negative 2, this can also be written as minus x over 2 equals 3.5. I take the 3, times it by the 2, and then add the 1 so that I get 7 over 2. And the great thing about this problem is that we don't have to find a common denominator. We already have one. So all of the 2's cancel, and my new equation is 3 minus x equals 7. And I start by subtracting 3 from both sides, because this is really a positive 3. And the 3's cancel. I'm left with negative x equals 4. But your problem isn't finished until you have x equals. You don't want to leave your answer as negative x equals. So I divide both sides of this equation by negative 1. And the final answer is x is equal to negative 4. For number 6, now we have an inequality, but the process is exactly the same as it is for an equation. So starting with 1/7 w, I will rewrite this as 1w over 7, or just w over 7, plus 53 over 56 is less than or equal to 6 over 7. So if I take my denominators, starting with 7, I know that 7 multiplies by 8 to give me 56, so that's good to know because then I'm not going to list the multiples of 56. I'm just going to continue my list until I get to 56. And say that my least common denominator is equal to 56. And I want to multiply the numerator and denominator by 8 on the first and last fractions so that I have a 56 in all 3 of my denominators. So I have 8w over 56 plus 53 over 56 is less than or equal to 48 over 56. If the denominators are the same, they still cancel just like in an equation, and we're left with 8w plus 53 is less than or equal to 48. So to solve for w, I subtract 53 from both sides of this inequality. The 53's cancel, and I have 8w is less than or equal to negative 5. 48 minus 53 is negative 5. And my last step is to divide both sides by 8. And when I divide both sides by 8, my final answer is w is less than or equal to negative 5 over 8. So this is my answer as an inequality, but then I have to graph the solution. So I go to my number line, and I just place 0 in the middle, and since my answer is w is less than or equal to negative 5/8, Negative 5/8 is to the left of 0, but then I also want to place its positive value on my number line. And W is less than or equal to negative 5/8, gets a closed circle on negative 5/8 because you have a line under the inequality, and less than means shade to the left. So less than left, this is my answer graphed. For number 7, negative 1/6x I will rewrite as negative 1x over 6 plus 2 over 3 is greater than 1/4. So if I list my multiples of 6, I need to find a least common denominator, and I'm looking for a match between the multiples of 6, 3, and 4. And I always start by listing the first 5 unless I see a match. And I see a match at 12, so I'll stop 4's list, write at 12, and so my least common denominator is 12. So I want to multiply the first fraction by 2 over 2, the second fraction by 4 over 4, and the third fraction by 3 over 3. So that this inequality changes to negative 2x over 12 plus 8 over 12 is greater than 3 over 12. And now I can cancel all of the 12's and get negative 2x plus 8 is greater than 3. And if I subtract 8 from both sides, negative 2x is greater than negative 5. And the difference between inequalities and equations is that when you divide both sides by a negative number, the inequality switches direction. So the final answer for my inequality is now x is less than positive 5 over 2. And 5 over 2, as a mixed number, if I take 2 and divide it into 5, is the same as 2.5. So when you draw your number line, you can use either 5 over 2 or 2.5. I'll use 2.5. So if I place 0 in the middle, and then positive 2.5 to the right, and negative 2.5 to the left, because my answer was x is less than gets an open circle because we don't have the line under the inequality symbol. Less than means left, so I shade to the left. And for number 8, negative 2/5 m, we start by writing as negative 2m over 5 plus 2 over 15 is less than 2/3. So to find my common denominator, I'll write the first few multiples of 5, and I'm going to go a little bit out of order this time. The next denominator, I'm going to use 3. And when I get to 15, the first multiple is 15, which matches the other two lists. So my least common denominator is equal to 15. So I multiply the first fraction by 3 over 3 and the last fraction by 5 over 5. So then I'm left with negative 6m over 15 plus 2 over 15 is less than 10 over 15. All of the 15's cancel, and I have negative 6m plus 2 is less than 10. And if I subtract 2 from both sides, I have negative 6m is less than 8. And when I divide both sides by negative 6, I have to remember to switch the direction of the inequality to m is greater than 8 over negative 6. And 8 over negative 6 reduces to negative 4/3, and negative 4/3, if I change this to a mixed number, is negative 1 1/3. So the inequality is m is greater than negative 4/3 or negative 1 1/3. So if I go to the graph, I will write this as a mixed number. I have negative 1 1/3 to the left, and then I just take the opposite sign, so positive 1 1/3. And if my answer is greater than, then it just gets an open circle. Less than goes to the left, so greater than goes to the right. And for number 9, negative 45 over 1 is less than or equal to negative 1m, or just negative m, over 2 plus 4. And I write the 4 over 1. So hopefully finding a least common denominator is getting easier. We can list the multiples of 1 and 2, but I think this one is simpler to see that the least common denominator is just the number 2. And so I multiply all of the fractions that do not have a denominator of 2 by the number 2. And I have negative 90 over 2 is less than or equal to negative 1m over 2 plus 8 over 2. The 2's cancel, and I have negative 90 is less than or equal to negative 1m plus 8. And in solving for m, the negative 1 is being multiplied by m. So I want to subtract 8 from both sides first, and negative 90 minus 8, I'm adding two negatives, so it's negative 98 is less than or equal to negative 1m. So my final step in solving for m is to divide both sides by negative 1, but because I'm dividing by a negative, not only is the sign of the negative 98 going to change to a positive 98, but it also gets flipped. So I have 98 is greater than or equal to m, but when you write your final answer for inequalities, you always want the variable on the left side. So you just want to move the variable to the left side, but when you do that, you have to switch the inequality again. So it's m is less than or equal to 98. So this is the inequality, and then when I graph this, I put 0 in the middle, negative 98 on the left, positive 98 on the right. Less than or equal to gets a closed circle, and less than means left, so I shade to the left. And for number 10, we have some decimals here. N over negative 5, I will rewrite this as negative 1n over positive 5 plus 3.2 over 1 is greater than or equal to 1.4 over 1. And my least common denominator is 5. So having the decimals here doesn't change the process. I still want to get a 5 in all of the denominators. So I have negative 1n over 5 plus 16 over 5 is greater than or equal to 7 over 5. All of the 5's cancel, and I have negative 1n plus 16 is greater than or equal to 7. And I subtract 16 from both sides, so that negative 1n is greater than or equal to negative 9. Divide both sides by negative 1, and I now have n is less than or equal to. The inequality switches direction whenever you divide by a negative to a positive 9. So that when I graph this, I have 0 in the middle, 9 on the right, negative 9 on the left. N is less than or equal to. Less than or equal to gets a closed circle. Less than means left, so I shade to the left.